Welcome into the Monday Morning Coffee here on Pewter Radio Network, recapping yesterday's 27-20 loss for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the hands of the Detroit Motor City Kitties, the Lions. Recapping that game shortly, we're going to be going over statistics, we're going to be going over game analysis and game breakdown. But before we get into that, let's introduce the show for what it is. It's a new thing, a new item on the pewterplank.com. I'm Josh Hill, senior writer over at twp.com. Basically what this show is going to be every Monday morning we'll be breaking down the game that happened the day before, or on a special occasion this season, Tuesday morning coffee, where you're breaking down that Monday night game against the Indianapolis Colts. Basically it's a bit of audio journalism that if you don't have time to take a look over on the site, don't have time to read everything in the morning, just pop this in, press play, and everybody still wins. You get your Bucs news, and everybody is satisfied. Well, unless you're a member of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, because today you have to deal with the fact that you lost to the Detroit Lions 27-20 at home to open the season. Not a lot to show offensively, not a lot to show defensively. There were flashes on both sides of the ball, which, if they can be repeated in more of a frequent occasion, Tampa Bay just might be all right. Of course, I'm referring to the first drive that the Lions had. Although the defense allowed the Lions to march down the field, they were able to force just a field goal and stop them after the Lions were inside of the Buccaneers' 5. So that was not a bad showing there, and it was a false pretense to what the game was going to hold, because after that, Aqib Talib intercepted a Matthew Stafford tipped pass, brought that back for a touchdown. Other than that, it was not a good day post the Talib touchdown for the Buccaneers defense. They allowed successful drive after drive for the Lions. Not everyone ending in a score, but a lot of them ending in a lot of yards and a lot of time taken off the clock, which ended up being the Achilles heel for the Buccaneers. Just not enough time. Something else the Buccaneers did not have a lot of was offensive production and a lot of highlights to show for their opening day performance against the Detroit Lions. Heading into halftime, it was a very one-sided, lopsided game. You had the Detroit Lions on one side, who were just absolutely racking up the yardage, racking up the time of possession, which was huge, and the Buccaneers were on the other end of the field trying to figure out what was going wrong and why this was happening after a very promising preseason and a very successful season last season. But that just goes to show how much things can change in very little time. Let's get into some game recap here. The Lions were the ones that struck first at the 8:58 mark. That was on the drive that the Buccaneers stopped them once the Lions were inside of the Tampa Bay 5. Lions walk away with a field goal at 23-yard. Jason Hanson on the attempt on that one. That made it 3-0, and then Tampa Bay was able to strike right back. They drive down the field. Connor Barth hits a 38-yard field goal, and you have yourself a tie ball game at 3-3. That was at the 7:12 mark in the first quarter. Tampa Bay, they actually had 2 scoring possessions in a row. It happened once in the entire game, and it happened in the very first quarter. After that 38-yard field goal from Connor Barth, the Lions, Matthew Stafford threw an interception that was brought back 28 yards in Tampa's direction. Aqib Talib gets his first of the year. That made it 10-3, and it also gave the illusion that Tampa Bay was going to be able to do something with this game. At the end of the first quarter, Jason Hanson hit another 28-yard field goal to make it 10-6, and then in the second quarter, it was the touchdown connection that no Buccaneer fan wanted to hear yesterday. Calvin Johnson, 36 yards from Matthew Stafford, made it 13-10, but it was still anybody's ball game at that point at the 7:16 mark in the second quarter. Tampa Bay then continued to not be able to move the football, and the Lions continued to benefit and reward themselves for stopping Tampa Bay, or maybe just exposing their weaknesses and exploiting their mistakes. At the 1:16 mark, right before halftime, at the end of a very long Detroit Lions drive, one of many long Detroit Lions drives, Tony Scheffler is on the receiving end of an 11-yard touchdown pass from Matthew Stafford. That made it 20-10. And now Tampa Bay didn't give up. Because right here, right after the Tony Scheffler touchdown, they are able to drive down the field and make it look like they were going to score. It looked like Tampa was going to get into the end zone. They don't get a pass interference call, so Connor Barth is called on for a 31-yard field goal, which made it 20-13. Out of the gates of halftime at the 6:16 mark, that dreaded touchdown call, the cold-blooded connection, it was announced once again. Calvin Johnson with a 1-yard pass this time from Matthew Stafford. That made it 27-13. That was it for the scoring for the Detroit Lions. The Bucs had more in them, though. After a lot of nothing happening, a lot of the Bucs not being able to move the ball, and a lot of the Lions being able to stop and eat time off the clock, Tampa, at the end of the game, with 1:35 left, got to hear a touchdown call that they want to hear a lot this season. We're waiting all day to hear. Josh Freeman 5 yards into the back of the end zone for Mike Williams. That made it a 27-20 game. It was a great catch by Mike Williams. Another one he can add to his resume. They showed the replay. They reviewed it. He got both feet in. Barely got both feet in, but got them in. It counted 27-20. And then it got interesting, because the Buccaneers had 2 timeouts left with under a minute and a half left. They did not get the onside kick, but the Lions did not keep themselves from making mistakes. 3 straight running plays they did to run out the clock. Didn't get the first down, but on the 3rd down run play, after the Buccaneers had expensed both of their timeouts, a personal foul call on the Detroit Lions moved them back 15 yards and stopped the clock. Tampa had no timeouts at this point, and the Lions stopped the clock with a personal foul penalty. Now, this also moves the ball back and gave the Buccaneers marginally better field position, in theory. Tampa then is able to move the ball a little better than they were before, but it was too little too late, and the game ended on one of the obligatory everybody touches the football play, where the offensive tackle gets it, the wide receiver gets it, the running back gets it. It didn't end any more cliche than it usually does, with the team trying to make the frantic run to the end zone and losing. That was the case for the Buccaneers. 27-20, the final score. Looking at the statistics after the game, going into the game, it looked like a very, very winnable game. All Tampa needed to do was, it seemed, take Ndamukong Suh out of the game. And they did that to an extent. What they didn't do was compensate for all 10 other defensive members for the Detroit Lions. They did a very good job of containing Ndamukong Suh. That was clearly one of the things that was very high on their to-do list. But the running game never developed, because everybody else that wasn't named Ndamukong Suh wasn't being properly covered. And the passing game, whether it was because the Lions cornerbacks are just that good, or because Josh Freeman just had that bad of a day, never developed either. It did, however, for the Detroit Lions. Matthew Stafford, who didn't get to play last season's matchup against the Buccaneers, goes for 305 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception, and a completion percentage of 72.7. Josh Freeman, not so lucky on the other side of that flipped coin, 65.1% completion percentage. He only goes for 257 in yardage, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. But the rushing statistics are another killer for the Buccaneers. Last year, LeGarrette Blount went 100+ yards on the defense of the Lions. This year, he does not get past 15 yards. LeGarrette Blount didn't even top the rushing list. The final statistics for rushing was topped by Josh Freeman's 4 carries for 26 yards on the Buccaneers side of the football. LeGarrette Blount didn't even finish in second. He got outrushed by Ernest Graham, who finished with more yards than Mr. Blount. Javed Best, on the other side, though, he had 21 carries. A lot of those, too, are padded because of the 3rd and 4th quarter when the Lions just couldn't get rid of the football, even if they wanted to. He gets 21 carries and just 72 yards, but 72 crucial yards that ate up a lot of time for the Buccaneers. Calvin Johnson didn't have as incredible of a day as he did last season, where he went 150+ on E.J. Biggers, but Aqib Talib did, to an extent, stop Calvin Johnson. He only allowed 88 yards through the air to Calvin Johnson, 6 receptions, but 2 gigantic touchdowns. Had Aqib Talib stopped one of those touchdowns, the game either goes into overtime or is completely different. The Bucks could still have lost the game, but you take away one of those Calvin Johnson touchdowns, and you're looking at a 2020 ball game when time expires. Whether or not the Lions are able to score some other way before then, who's to say? But who's also to say that the Buccaneers weren't motivated by the game being tied and are able to lead a winning drive in that last drive that they had? Kellen Winslow, K2, he tops the Buccaneers receiving list. 6 receptions of himself, or to himself, the same as Johnson, but he finishes with 66 yards, averaging 11 yards per catch, but he stays out of the end zone. The lone touchdown offensively for the Buccaneers comes from Mike Williams, which is a connection that Bucs fans would like to hear. But a loss of words is really where a lot of people are right now, because this is such a winnable game for the Buccaneers. You have the Lions coming in who have really not proved anything other than they have a lot of talent on paper. And now you've given them the opportunity on your dime to prove themselves as a probable force. Now, looking ahead to next week in comparison to this week, Tampa Bay travels north to Minneapolis to battle the Minnesota Vikings. Now, the Vikings, a team that I've followed very closely in my life, and very closely this offseason, are a team you have to watch out for, especially if you're a team like the Buccaneers. What the Vikings have in store next week is it's possibly a step up from what the Lions had this week, an offense that has the potential to burn you if you give them the opportunities. The Vikings have more of a chance to burn you than the Lions did, because the Lions really only have Matthew Stafford to Calvin Johnson. That's their big weapon right there. The Vikings, their big weapon is Adrian Peterson and the running game. Now, whether Javed Best isn't that developed of a runner, or the Buccaneers did indeed do a good job of stopping him. I mean, 21 carries and 72 yards is not that impressive of a statistic if you're a running back. It's pretty in the middle. Now, you give Adrian Peterson 21 carries, he could easily go over 200 yards on you. That's going to be something to watch next week, and that's definitely going to be on the minds of the defensive line. Now, another thing to watch for next week, the offensive line. They failed LeGarrette Blount this week, whether it was because they didn't have enough time to give him the ball or because they just failed to open up running lanes. Next week, if the Buccaneers offensive line plays the way that it played this week against the Lions developing defensive line, they are going to get eaten alive by a man named Jared Allen, flying off the defensive end. I've seen him play before. I've seen what he can do to offensive linemen that are slightly intimidated by him. You line up somebody against him that is not ready to block him, Josh Freeman is going to have a very, very long day, and he might leave like he did this week, but he just might not come back. So that is one thing that you have to watch for next week. The offensive line. Another thing is the defensive line. Will they be able to stop Adrian Peterson? In the secondary, Calvin Johnson was contained to an extent this week, with Aqib Talib letting him go only 88 yards, but 2 big-time scores. Next week, not as many big-time receivers as Calvin Johnson, but more little guys that can come get you. Percy Harvin is a guy that you're going to have to watch out of the slot. You're going to have to watch Bernard Berrian. You're going to have to watch Malcolm Jenkins, who Bucs are very familiar with his time in Atlanta. Just more things that Tampa Bay needs to watch for next week. Because the NFC South, even though the Saints and the Falcons lost, is going to recover. Tampa Bay missed a big opportunity to get a leg up on those two teams this week. They're going to have to move on from it and try to recover next week. This has been the Monday Morning Coffee on the Pewter Plank Radio Network. I'm Josh Hill, senior writer with the pewterplank.com. We'll catch you next Monday for a recap. Hopefully Buccaneers win. Check the site throughout the week for the best Bucs prep on the web. And don't forget, coming up we have an article. Big news for the site. We have the Bucs Pewter Plank Road Crew. We're going on the road. Check that out on the site this week. I'm Josh Hill, senior writer with the Pewter Plank. We will see you next week for Monday Morning Coffee.